Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Corey Ann Haydu, who is actually a children's book writer. She writes for all different ages in the children's book genre. And I'm going to actually let her explain briefly about a little bit about herself and about her writing.
Awesome. Yeah, so I write as of this summer. I have books out everywhere from chapter books, sort of kindergarten and up, all the way through to upper YA, so sort of 14 and plus books, with a lot of middle grade in between as well. So yeah, I've been busy kind of figuring out different voices in all of those different age categories. Um, and I tend to write a lot about family and friendship, and often with an eye towards the experience of being a girl in the world and what that means at different ages and with different experiences, and often also with a, a light touch of magic in most of my work at this point.
Magic, yes. So most of your books are actually fantasy related.
Yeah, I would call them sort of like a maybe magic. They don't tend to be heavy duty fantasy realm. They tend to be set a lot in the real world, but with hints of magic, maybe with the exception of my most recent YA novel, Ever Cursed, which is a full on fairy tale. So that is set in a more sort of magical kingdom sort of world. But the rest of my books, ever since maybe 2015, I really started putting magic in. I had a solid few books that were straightforward contemporary for a while, and but as soon as I started kind of sprinkling magic in, I couldn't let it go. So now there's always some magic in there now.
So you kind of answered my next question is for readers unfamiliar with your work, how would you describe what you write and what can readers expect from your newest book?
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, it's often sort of a maybe magic, a hint of magic, magic that sort of turns up the volume on different issues I'm interested in exploring. So if it's a book about grief, magic that in some way amplifies or emphasizes the experience of grief. With the most recent book, Ever Cursed, the magic sort of turns up the volume on different feminist issues. And in my younger reader series, I have that here too, Hand Me Down Magic, which is the younger reader series. That magic is sort of meant to bring together the family that I'm writing about. Yeah, magic that sort of emphasizes and illustrates the themes of the book. And a lot of my books question the need to feel perfect, the need for perfection in our world, the sort of pursuit to be really put together and everything be fine and everyone talk about nice things. I tend to sort of question that idea in my books. So a lot of my ideas grapple with, do we need to be perfect? Does everything need to always look so nice and neat and put together all the time? Or can we sort of embrace the messiness of being alive?
Do you think, this is my own question, do you think that it's more the female point of view that questions that?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I certainly think there's a lot of pressure on girls and women to be perfect in a lot of different ways, to look a really particular way, and also to be nice in a really particular way, and to make the world nice for their friends and family, and to make things easy for people. I know I felt a lot of that pressure growing up, and still feel that pressure sometimes to not be a burden and to be really good. And although I'm not sure I can fix it in myself at this point, I do hope that the books sort of poke holes in that idea for the young readers reading them.
Great. So, what kind of research went into writing this book, and what's your favorite research story, and what cool facts and findings didn't make it into the book, but you love discovering?
Yeah. So Ever Cursed is probably one of the books I've written with the least research, probably not in small part because it is set in a world of my own making. So a lot of the research is almost research on yourself and the world you've created. You know, I'll write a draft and then see all the ways things don't make sense and have to sort of do research on what it is I even wrote. And it does feel not dissimilar to the research I did for a book like, say, OCD Love Story, where I was really delving into research on obsessive compulsive disorder, or other books like that. With this book, one of the things I did research, which is just a small little thing, but shows you how often research comes into play when you're writing even a mostly fantasy novel. There's a magic element in the book where the witches in the novel gain a skirt that is permanently affixed to their body every time they cast a spell. And the skirt's weight and heaviness correlates with how serious the spell they cast was. So, you know, for sort of a silly light spell, they'd have a light fabric, and for a really important spell, they would have to wear something quite heavy and burdensome. And so I did a great deal of research on the weights of fabrics, which you start, you know, typing these things into Google and you're like, what is my career? This is so strange, you know, and you know, is flannel the heaviest? Is burlap? And, you know, trying to figure out what would be really, really heavy and what would be really, really light. Because, it's small things, but you have a very clear picture in your head. And even when you're working with fantasy and magic, you really want it to also be based in reality. So I wanted to be informed on those facts, and make sure, you know, someone reading it, if they knew their fabric, they'd say, oh yes, that would be quite a heavy thing to have to carry around with you. So yeah, with this novel, it was a lot of small detailed things that sort of came up as I went.
Uh-huh. And while you were writing, were you doing your research, or did you do research ahead of time?
With this book, the research would really come up during the process. Now, with other books, again, like OCD Love Story, which required a lot of like really in-depth research around psychology and psychiatry and treatment of OCD and all kinds of things in that field, that was a lot of research up front, sort of doing the research and the thinking and the trying to figure out what it was I wanted to represent and talk about in that subject matter was like upfront work. But that wasn't the case with this current book, with Ever Cursed, which was really more in the moment, like, oops, I guess I'm going to have to figure out, you know, how to answer that question.
Okay. And what was your inspiration for Ever Cursed? And what were the steps that you took to bring it from initial inspiration to the finished book?
Yeah. I mean, since I sort of had this slow process into writing about magic, you know, where I started writing contemporary and then slowly have just sort of added more and more into my writing. After I had quite a few magic books under my belt, I did feel like maybe it's time to do something that's really more solidly in that world, like out of my comfort zone. And what would that look like that would still be exciting to me? Because I'm not like a traditional fantasy writer. So it was like, how could I incorporate more and more magic and world building, but from a place that is like of a passion of mine? And I came up with wanting to write a feminist fairy tale, which has become, you know, there are certainly other books out there that are doing that. And I just felt like I had something to say there, that I've always been really interested in fairy tales. Even my first middle grade novel, Rules for Stealing Stars, was based a little bit on the fairy tale, The 12 Dancing Princesses. So I'd played in that realm before, but I wondered what it would be like to make my own fairy tale and to use the tropes of the fairy tale world to sort of investigate a more feminist message and sort of think about the world we're in right now. So those were sort of the initial steps. But over time, I actually sold the book a short time before having my daughter, and then took, you know, 4 months off while I was on maternity leave, and then sort of dove back into the book. And so the book really changed a lot just because of that change in my life and in me, and having the time to step away from the book and come back to it with fresh eyes also sort of built it into something new with dual perspectives and all kinds of things that weren't in the initial sort of intended idea.
Okay, what was your biggest challenge in writing and putting out Evercursed, and how did you overcome that challenge?
That's a great question. I think probably the biggest challenge came early on when I was originally writing the book from one point of view, from Princess Jane's point of view, which is, a really particular place in the kingdom of Ever. She is living in the castle and quite separated from her subjects and living a life of privilege and wealth. And she has a terrible curse upon her, but her perspective on the kingdom she lives in is really specific to her experience. And I realized really early on that writing from that place meant that the witch character, Reagan, who I was interested in exploring too, came across as just a really straightforward villain character. And it was so in conflict with what I wanted to say about that character and who I imagined that character to be. And I kept trying to write it differently and just couldn't find a way to make Reagan come across the way I imagined her in my head, which was also sympathetic in certain ways. And so I realized, after writing, quite a large chunk of a draft, that actually the story was both of their stories and they needed to both be on the page. And so that was a big part of overcoming that sort of stumbling block. But also there was a real personal obstacle to that, because the first book I ever wrote, which never sold, was a 4-perspective novel. And a lot of the feedback on that had been about how the voices and the characters weren't distinct enough. And I'd really been carrying that message around with me as this thing I'd failed at. And so when I realized I had to actually write a dual perspective novel, I was scared. I was like, I failed at this when I tried this before. And should I really ever do this? Maybe I'm never supposed to write a book like this. So there was also sort of a mental challenge in getting over that story I told myself about myself and my writing.
Okay, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you before was, what is your favorite book? What do you like reading? And did that somehow influence what you write?
Yeah, I mean, my very favorite book of all time is Lois Lowry's The Giver, which I'm sure is not an unusual answer to that question. A lot of us love that book. But I do think it had a huge influence on what I wanted to write, because that's also a book that really pokes holes in our perception of what is important and what kind of people we want to be, and sort of challenges you to think about what type of world you want to live in and who you want to be in that world. So that, that book had a big influence on me. But I read very widely in sort of children's and YA in general, and get influenced, I think, from all of those voices that I'm consuming. Alana Arnold writes really beautiful feminist fairy tales for a YA audience as well. Her work means a lot to me. One of my favorite YA novels recently is Liara Timani's Calling My Name, which is really beautiful, sort of short, almost vignette-like chapters, a really delicate, sort of beautiful story. But yeah, I mean, every time I read, I think I'm picking up little bits and pieces. And I do tend to like things that are set a lot in a contemporary world, but with something else going on. I like things that are a little bit unusual and a little bit off the beaten path, maybe. But not, I'm not a huge science fiction or fantasy reader. I like it to be a little bit outside of my world and a little bit strange and unusual. So that's what I try to go for too.
Okay. Now, what character did you love or hate the most while you're writing the book?
I always struggle to write male characters who are complicated in some way. And the character of the king is a really complicated character in the book. He is really beloved by his kingdom and by his daughters. But as the book unfolds, it becomes clear that he also is carrying a lot of responsibility for some of the horrors of what has happened in Ever, and is also like is considered to be this good and great and wonderful, gentle king, but that is not the whole truth of who he is, and that is a lot of perception. And finding the balance to write someone who the readers really need to believe in his goodness, and his daughters really believe in his goodness, and so much of the kingdom does as well. And how to balance that out with who he really is, and make sure both of those realities have space on the page, was a real challenge, to sort of find the right way to get it, that nuance. I think it's always tricky when a character is many, many things, and the reader has to believe different things about them at different times in the book. And that was a real challenge of writing the king.
So which character did you love or hate the most?
Well, I guess he's the one I hated writing because of what a challenge that was sort of such a frustrating. I guess I never hate any of them.
Yeah, it's hard to hate.
It's hard to hate
create.
them. Exactly. Well, and I come from an acting background, and a really big lesson we learned back in my acting days is that you can't act a character who you don't sort of find a way to sympathize with. Like, you can't be judging the character you're playing while you're playing them. You have to be more in tune with them and find their reason for doing the things they do. So even if you are playing a villain, you as an actor can't be sitting there on stage judging that villain and saying, oh God, these awful things he's doing, I guess I'll just act them out. Like, that's not going to read as an authentic performance. And so I sort of apply that to my writing. He is in a lot of ways a character who, I certainly have no interest in meeting him on the street or living in his kingdom. But I had to, if I'm going to write him authentically, I have to find a way in, that at least while I'm writing him, I'm not judging as much. I can judge him later when I revise. So I guess that's who I sort of hate in some ways. In terms of the character I love, I loved writing Reagan the witch, the second perspective that I introduced a little further into the process. She is really angry. And I have not gotten to write a lot of really angry characters. And I don't think there are tons of really angry characters, especially female characters. And it was really exciting to face her anger and know how she is also sweet and wonderful and a good friend and a good daughter. And is also carrying anger and is flawed, like everyone is. And especially if you're a teenager who is facing difficult circumstances, you are going to make difficult and imperfect decisions within that. And I really loved exploring that, and letting her be imperfect.
Okay. What draws you to this particular genre and or style that you write? And what do you think draws readers to this particular type of genre? I know the readers are children, but
I like giving new perspectives to things. I like writing about things that I'm confused about myself. And so I'm drawn to children's literature in general, and also this sort of playing with magic in the real world, because it helps me think through difficult things going on in our society and how do I feel about it and how do I engage with that, I can sort of work that out while I write the book, and I can sort of ask those big questions and see if I add some magic in, if that might help me figure out some answers, or if I turn up the volume on some characters and let them play out some circumstances that are difficult. I just find myself drawn to working things out that I'm curious about on the page, and I think that's why readers find that their way there as well. I tend to write about darker, more difficult subject matters, and growing up, that's what I was drawn to. I had a lot going on at home, and I just had a lot going on that felt really overwhelming for a kid. And so I was drawn to books that were darker themed and about more serious topics, and just to feel less alone, and to also because children's books usually have some hope. And it was a place that I could both see that things could be really tough, and also see that there was a way to find hope even in really tough circumstances. So I hope that's what draws readers to my work, that they know they're going to be seen, for, yep, things are really hard, but also offered some hope.
Great. So what's your favorite part of being a writer, and on the whole, on writing and the whole publishing process? And what do you think has been your greatest lesson in the journey so far?
Oh man, favorite part. I mean, I love so much of my job. It is so much of what I wanted to do. It's hard to pick out like what I love the most. I love the part of the process where things start to really come together. I write really messy first drafts and revise quite extensively, often starting from scratch. And I love that part of the process where something really messy starts to like click and make sense. And you're like, oh, wait, maybe this is going to be a book. Like, I love finding that feeling and taking the risks that get you there. I also really love connecting with young readers, being in classrooms, being in libraries, getting to be one-on-one, or be, myself in a classroom of kids, in a group of kids, talking about books and trying to get them excited about writing and reading. And I'm also a teacher myself for a graduate program, and I get a lot of joy out of that, out of helping students hone their own writing skills. And I almost kind of love that for the same reason I love revising my work, that like, ooh, I know how to do this. I know how to like make things come together and how to help you get to that next level. Like, that's so exciting it's exciting to do it for yourself, but it might be even more exciting when you can give that to someone else. And you're like, I got it.
Yeah, you were talking about teaching. You said you teach grad students, or?
Yeah, I teach at an MFA program. I teach at the VCFA, the Vermont College of Fine Arts Writing for Children program. So I'm teaching people pursuing their master's in fine arts in writing for children. So that's really exciting. I've taught in after-school programs for kids as well, which is also very energy-bringing and joyful and fun.
That's great.
Yeah.
What piece of advice would you want to share with other writers and even your students?
My biggest writing advice, aside from sort of the things you'll always hear, which is read a lot and write a lot, and those are both really true. But in terms of like nitty-gritty sort of craft advice, the two things I tell my students the most, and that I tell myself the most in my own work, are the two things you really need are big, bold choices and tiny, tiny details. And really strong writing comes from both of those places, from places where you're taking risky, big choices and you're doing things in a really big and committed way, while you're also filling out the world with like the tiniest little, exactly what what their bracelet is engraved with, and exactly how they cook their eggs, and just the perfect shade on the awning in front of the store, like really, really digging into those details while also making those big, big, bold choices.
Okay. How important has the New England setting been to your books?
Pretty important, I would say. I write a lot of lakes. You'll see a lot of lakes in my work, and a lot of sort of New England feeling towns. Now, in my first books, a lot of them were literally New England, set in Massachusetts and Vermont. As time has gone on and I've written a little bit less in specific places, the books, the sort of imagined world, are often based a lot in those sort of lakeside towns and that New England feel and the pine trees and the mountains and all of that really comes out in my book. Eventown, my the last middle grade novel I had out, was heavily based on a town that I used to spend summers with in New Hampshire, as sort of like an idyllic. What's an idyllic town? Oh, I know, it's that place I spent summers in New Hampshire.
Yep. So, what question would you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would your answer be?
So hard because people ask such excellent questions in general, and I've gotten to answer such fun stuff. Um, I think it's always interesting to talk about, writing at a specific moment. And now is certainly a really intense, specific moment to be writing in. So I would always love interviews to ask, like, whether it's now or at a less complicated time or a more complicated time, who knows, but, how is it writing right now in the way your life is or the world is in general? Because this period of time has been such a change for the world, for the country, for all of us. But there's those little changes in just your everyday life that have such a big effect on whatever your work is. And for me, that's writing. I'm a person that always wrote in coffee shops, and I really love being out in the world and writing that way. And so having to become a person who can write at home has been this incredible challenge. And I have a young child, so having to figure out how to wake up, at 5 a.m. and write then instead of writing at more comfortable hours of the day. That those I love thinking about how your real life intersects with writing, and I'm curious if the books that I'm writing now will feel different to readers. That's the question I'll have for readers that I want them to answer. Do these books feel different? Can you tell this one was written, during a quarantine? Can you tell this one was written in when I had a baby? I'm curious if that much of me pours through or not. I think it's sort of an interesting philosophical question about writers.
Okay. What else can we expect from you in the near future?
Yeah, I've got a good amount of books coming out. So let's see. The next book I have out is my next middle grade novel, which is called One Jar of Magic. And it is also, you'll see some New England vibes in that one. A non-specific town that's not necessarily New England, but I think any New Englander reading it is going to be like, oh yeah, okay, I know this. And that is about a girl who's supposed to be destined to be to follow in her father's very magical footsteps, and things don't go as planned, and she has to sort of navigate that disappointment while also learning a lot about her family in the process. So I'm really excited for that book. I will have the third book that comes out February 9th, 2021. In May, the third book in my Hand Me Down Magic series will come out, and that one is called The Perfect Patchwork Purse, and it's, I think, my favorite in the series. It's a little bit about jealousy, which I think is a fun emotion to explore, especially for young readers. So yeah, that'll be out then, and then I should have another YA novel coming out 2022 or 2023. And that novel is actually multi-generational and written in verse. So it's been a real undertaking. So we're still working. As you might imagine, that one is just taking years and years and years to get right. But I'm really excited about when it someday comes out.
Well, that sounds really interesting.
It's been a quite a challenge, but really like a great challenge. And like the last question you asked me, it's mostly what I've been working on in this period of time, and it ended up being the perfect project for right now because, especially at the beginning of quarantine and COVID, my mind just couldn't take in like whole paragraphs and whole chapters, and I got to just focus on these poems that were contained, and I could sort of shrink the world down to that one poem on the page, and something about that was just so much easier for me to do in this time. So yeah, I'm very excited about that book. It's been a really exciting creative process.
It's interesting because I know that a lot of people were finding it's very, very hard to be creative during this time. Yeah.
Yeah. I suggest first try writing in verse if you're struggling. Try poems.
That's an idea.
Yep.
So what is or are your passions when you're not writing, and how do you make time for your non-writing hobbies and things you love?
Not very well right now. Aside from writing and reading, which I consider sort of in the same world, I love yoga and I love cooking. So those food and yoga are probably my two other big passions. I try to make time for both. What I love about both of them, particularly cooking, that's so different than writing, is the way I cook. Now, I'm not like a try new things and make my own recipe kind of cook, I think, because that's too close to the writing process. I don't need to experiment there. So what I love about cooking is I get the recipe and I follow the recipe, and it's usually pretty similar to what I expected going in. And that's so different than the writing process for me. That's very different from my messy writing process, and really sort of the perfect antidote to when I'm coming off of like a very frustrating day. I'm like, okay, I will just make this chicken and it will be chicken and it will look sort of like the picture, and that's enough for me. So yeah, and I think yoga similarly sort of helps me think about something else that I have a little more control over. My creative process feels quite unruly, and so anything that sort of brings it back down is a good help. But it's hard to find, again, especially in this time and with a young child, it is very hard to find time for those things. So it's like shrinking the time, right? I used to do an hour of yoga and cook a complicated meal, and now it's like 20 minutes of yoga, and like my kid watches Daniel Tiger and I like in there. It's not the same way it used to be, but trying to make time for it anyway.
Wow. So what does your writing space look like, and what do you need to have around you while you're writing or editing?
Yeah, so like I said, I mean, I used to be a person that wrote exclusively really in cafes. I love eavesdropping on people. I love being around people. That I'm sort of an extroverted writer. At least for a writer, I'm relatively extroverted. So I like being around people. But now my writing space is shared with my child's sort of play space. So it's me and a desk, and then she has a little desk with coloring things. And, the only thing I really need to have is coffee and Post-it notes. I mean, I do a lot of writing Post-it notes. I get very afraid I'm going to forget all these things occur to me while I'm working, and the Post-it notes are where they're really important. Like, don't forget this one. Make sure you do this for this character, do this to the plot. So Post-it notes and coffee, and I can at least sort of make it happen. But as I said, I'm writing mostly in the very early mornings now. So it's sort of a nice, before everyone else in the house is up, and it's me and the coffee and the work.
Any other food or drinks that you must have or not have with you?
No, and actually the coffee is like, I really like to write with my first cup of coffee. It's not the same if it's like a later cup of coffee. So I have to, if for some reason the morning doesn't go as planned, everyone really suffers because that means I am like waiting to have coffee until I can also write. So that's sort of my complicated little thing I've created for myself. But no other snacks really. I just the coffee.
Okay. And basically, writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions with them to either help them or hinder them through their work. And do you? And what do you have?
Yeah.
And do they help or hinder you?
I do. I have a small dog named Oscar, who is, gosh, I think 11 now.
Oh.
And he's very sweet. He's mostly, especially now that he's older, he does a lot of sleeping during my writing time. But it's nice to have sort of another presence around with you, and also a reason to get out of the house and sort of think and walk and leave the work behind a little bit too. I love, one of the best things about having a dog is taking the dog for a walk. I think that's like such a gift of the dog owner life.
What kind of a dog is it?
He's a Havanese Maltese mix. So a little
Aww.
white, fluffy, kind of Muppet looking dog. Very, very friendly, very sweet and gentle.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
See, this was I noticed this question and I was like, gosh, is there anything left that I haven't talked about before?
Couple of things, I'm sure. I'm sure we'll find other things.
I'm sure. You know, it's a tough one. I've talked about a lot of the sort of, being, having come from an acting background and things like that. One thing I'll say is that I often get asked, because I have so many books out, people will say, wow, you must be such a fast writer. And that is just not true about me. Now, there are certainly writers that write at a slower pace than me. But I think people have an idea of me as like, I write, 10,000 words a day and just, write really quick. And I'm a very consistent writer. I write every day, and that's what works for me. That's definitely not for everyone. So, when I get asked about like, wow, gosh, you just must write so much every day. I write 1,000 words every day. And there are occasional days I write 2,000, but that would be like the maximum of what I'd get out in a day. So I'm not sort of a fast writer. I'm just a very consistent writer. And I think part of that is because I always kept journals. From the age of 8 and on, I wrote in a journal every day. And so daily writing just sort of comes really easily to me as an adult now, because it was just always a part of my life. So that's definitely not for everyone. I'm not a believer that there's sort of one way to be a writer, but for me, because I had that early time being a big journal keeper, writing every day is sort of what keeps me going and keeps the books like appearing somehow.
So that's a really good way to do it, though. Interesting.
Yeah.
So what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
Oh, so much. I went on a really, really fun school visit tour for my first middle grade novel, for Rules for Stealing Stars, back in 2015. Wow, it's all kind of it's all mixing together. But back in 2015, I went on a school visit tour and got to meet with students sort of all over the country and talk about the book and talk about writing and encourage them to find their own stories, and also to just be really honest about why I wrote that book. That book is about a parent who's struggling with alcohol and with mental illness, and to be able to just stand in front of groups of kids and talk about my experience with those things growing up, and not, hide behind stuff or make things feel big and shameful and secretive, to just sort of talk about how the hard things you go through are stories you own and that you can share them, and that that's fine. And so that was a really exciting, it was exciting to be sort of jetting around the country, you know, and staying at hotels and doing all that. And then it was also just so exciting to get to connect with so many different kids in so many different places.
Great. When you're writing, do you prefer music, silence, or what?
Yeah, I mean, I've evolved on this. I used to be a person that listened to music while writing, and now I really don't. I think maybe because my life is so busy and loud. My 2-year-old is so loud. I really can't take any more input. I sort of can't take anything else in at this point, and so it has to be sort of a stripping away of stuff. Not in like an isolation chamber. I know some authors like really lights down and headphones on, and that's not where I'm at. I like to hear a little, you know, city noise in the background, but no music anymore. It's too much input. There's already so much input, right? All day long. So, yeah.
Okay. And what do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process, and how do you overcome that?
I think the hardest part for me is starting to, when you have an idea that's really exciting to you, but the process of figuring out how to make that a book, like, you know, feminist fairy tale, but like, what does that mean? And what are those characters? And what is the plot? And I'm not very, you know, plot is a real struggle for me. I love characters and small moments, but the stitching together of a plot is quite hard for me. So the process of taking something down, like, yes, this idea is so good, but how to actually make that real in a way that a reader can understand and engage with. So I guess that's sort of the first draft for me is tough. And as I said, often results in me needing to do like quite extensive revision, but I'm so much more comfortable with revision. Once there's something, then I can do something with it. I know how to build on it and change it and shift it. But when there's nothing, that's tough for me, because it's like, if I could just get something on the page, I could revise it. So, yeah.
Do you outline your book first, or do you just let the characters tell you what happens?
You know, historically, I was like 100% someone who did not outline. I just really let it flow. Since having a kid, I would say I've become a little bit more of an outliner, just out of necessity and needing that time to be a little bit more productive and focused for me. And actually, the chapter books really helped with that. The chapter books, that was a new space for me, and they're so much more compact, and sort of the plot is much more singular. And so I started outlining those. And once I saw how much that helps the writing process, I started being like, maybe I should do a little bit of outlining for my other books too. So I don't do heavy duty outlining, but I often have like a 2-page synopsis. So there's something to go to when I'm lost. It's not like what's in the next chapter. It's not sort of broken down that specifically. It's just an overview of the story. So I at least know where in the storyline I am. So that's sort of an in-between place I've found myself now.
Okay. And are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you would recommend to other writers that might have helped you along in your career?
Yeah, I mean, certainly SCBWI is a great place to be, you know, for a lot of to get some craft stuff addressed, but also learn about the industry. I think any group that people are at the same stage in their writing process as you and sort of in need of the same information is really helpful. When I was in grad school, it was before I had published, and we all sort of wanted to be publishing. And so we were able to, as a group, like, I'd learn a little bit over here, and someone else would make this mistake over here, and someone would succeed at this, and we could all sort of share those experiences. So I think SCBWI is also a place to form those groups. Because I do think you need people at a similar place in the publishing timeline to sort of bounce ideas off of, get information from, and all of that. And whether that's like a writing group or an industry group, or exactly what that is, I think can really vary. But I do think having a group that maybe helps you in both, that maybe can read your work and give feedback, and also can can give you industry information.
Okay. That's just about it. I just have a couple of other quick questions for you. Where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I'm going to give a little plug here for Annie's. Yes. We're at 65 James Street in Worcester, and we do curbside orders, and you can order books from us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. We send books out, so you can order anything from us and we will mail them to you. Anyways, it's interesting. Hold on 1 second.
Yep.
So if you need to get a copy of any of Corey Ann's books, you can get them through Annie's Bookstop of Worcester. And where else?
So certainly, if you are watching this, order from Annie's. That is the place to go. I am a big supporter of indie bookstores. So my other places that I would want you to order from would be either IndieBound or Bookshop, which both are places that support indie bookstores, independent bookstores. You can find a local one by you. You can order from somewhere like Annie's that will deliver to you, or do curbside pickup. But those are certainly the best places to buy books if that's available to you, or of course the library.
Thank you. And the other thing is, how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Yes. The best places to find me are, my website, which I do my best to keep updated, but that is CoreyAnnHaydu.com. I'm also pretty active on Instagram and on Twitter, and my handles at both of those places are just Corey Ann Haydu. So those are places to get updates about me and my work.
Great. Okay, so I really want to thank you for doing this interview with us. I really enjoyed talking to you.
You too.
And maybe we'll, when this whole thing is all over, the COVID thing is all over, maybe we can get you to come to the store sometime.
I would love that. I would love that.
That would be wonderful.
Yes, I'm going to be itching to go to bookstores. So that's all I want right now.
I know, to get out and go to bookstores.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much again, and we will see you sometime soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.